Hello, Frizzle fellas, and welcome to my recent reads. Now, I love these quick overview videos telling you about everything I've read recently, and for this one, it's been quite a while since I last made one. So today, I'm going to review for you 40 books. Just kidding. I do have 40 books to check in with you about, but some of them I'm going to be reviewing, and some of them I'm going to be breezing past. I've selected a few books in this video to highlight, some that I have very positive opinions on and some that I have very negative opinions on, and all books that are popular, so I think you'll be extra invested in those. And otherwise, we're going to keep this video snappy and breezy because I am going through books that I've read since November 2024 today. And we're going to be moving in approximately chronological order, but I have moved things around for ease of talking about series and chunks and stuff. So first, The Wheel of the Infinite, a slow-paced fantasy adventure standalone that I gave 4 stars. Then I had the pleasure of picking up some truly fantastic urban fantasy books, Ninth House and its sequel, Hell-Bent. And if you want to learn more about my thoughts on those, I'll direct you to my Best Books of 2024 video. I gave them both 5 stars. Another book that you can find my review in my Best Books of 2024 video is The Hacienda. I also gave that 5 stars. And that one is a gothic, historical ghost story with a side plot of romance and some horror elements. Then I read The Stolen Heir and The Prisoner's Throne, and I'm going to give you some more thorough reviews on these ones because I've got thoughts. So these books are a spin-off to the very popular Cruel Prince trilogy, which I have read before, and I did love those books. But when I got to The Stolen Heir, which is following a side character from the original trilogy, now grown up and experiencing her own adventures and romance, I loved it even more than the original Cruel Prince trilogy. And I think a lot of that is just down to personal taste of I connected more and was more invested in her story. The Cruel Prince trilogy is very focused on political machinations of spies, of the romance dynamic is very enemies to lovers, taking it all the way to bully romance, and though that is very entertaining, it was a little too far into bad boy for me to get on board with it. But then here in The Stolen Heir, both our protagonist and her love interest are much softer people. There is some political machinations, there are some interesting twists, some good lies, some manipulation, all of that, but it's a more traditional quest adventure kind of narrative. We're following a girl named Ren. She's kind of an unusual monstrous fey creature, has blue skin and sharp teeth, etc., and she was born a princess of the Fey realm, but because of the political upheaval and events of the original Cruel Prince trilogy, she lost all of that. And now she is in exile until the events of this book kick off when she is kind of forced to go on a quest with the golden boy crown prince of the Fey kingdom. And something that I really appreciated about The Stolen Heir, which you will find many, many negative reviews complaining about, so I disagree with the popular opinion, is that it was so restrained with how much it brought in from the original trilogy. Those main characters of the original trilogy, not in the book at all. They're barely mentioned. They're barely relevant. And I really loved how this book was forging its own path. And I gave the first book, The Stolen Heir, 4 stars. And then we got to the next book in the series, The Prisoner's Throne. And this book brought in so much more of that original plot, the original characters, and I really felt like it overshadowed the awesome new protagonist that I was so invested in. And so I gave The Prisoner's Throne 3 stars. Would I recommend the duology? Yes. You definitely have to read the Cruel Prince trilogy first, but if you read that and liked it, I think it's worth continuing. Then for the video, reading books that my nemesis hates, I read The Priest of Bones, which is a slow-paced gang warfare kind of book with the teensiest smidge of fantasy in it. Gave it 3 stars. And 3 Parts Dead, a kind of mix between high fantasy and urban fantasy smashed together, and I really didn't like the writing style. 2 stars to that one. Then I read The Night Realm, a romantasy paranormal romance book, which I gave 3 stars. I've read a lot of other paranormal romance books from this author, and I've liked all of those ones better than this one so far, so. Then a nonfiction book, a memoir called ADHD is Awesome. I think as an educational memoir, if you just want to know kind of the basics about what ADHD is and how this author and his wife and his family deal with his ADHD, I think it's a very entertaining and helpful book. If you're looking for more general information about ADHD, I think the scope of this memoir is somewhat a hindrance because it's just focused on these people's experience, and not everyone experiences ADHD the same. Anyway, I gave it 4 stars. I then read Wind and Truth, and boy, if you want my review for this, there's a video that is over an hour long of me and my husband discussing every single part of this book. It's highly entertaining. I recommend you go watch it. It's full spoilers though, so probably only if you've already read the book. I gave Wind and Truth 3 stars. And you can go find out why in that video. Then another nonfiction, Thinking Fast and Slow, and I tried so hard to read this one. I tried to listen to the audiobook, I tried to read it with my eyes, and every single time I ran into the brick wall of I hated the writing style. It was so verbose and annoyingly, pedantically academic. 2 stars. Then The Scorpio Races, a reread for me, 5 stars. Then let me talk some more about Blood Over Bright Haven, because I have some thoughts on this one. So this is a high fantasy book. I would say it's also solidly a dark academia book. You're following a woman and her whole goal in life is to get into the high, like, academic circles of sorcerers. She knows she's got the talent, she's got the drive and the ambition. What she's lacking is being a man, because it's a very sexist society and they don't let women in. They'll give one woman a chance like every decade, and she is going to take that chance. And of course, she gets in, the whole plot kicks off, and she's not very welcomed into her new position as a high sorcerer. In fact, right from the outset, she has snubbed the competent assistants she should be assigned, and instead given an underling of a very underqualified janitor into that position. But then it's through her interactions with this janitor guy that the whole plot quickly deepens and thickens, because the janitor comes from a group of people, of immigrants, a race that is very beaten down, disenfranchised in this city. The racism and classism is rampant. And it's through their interactions together that our main character woman here starts to realize there's even more flaws to the system than she was even aware of. And then they keep digging and they discover lots of secrets and plot twists, and they have a little romance. And there's a lot of things that I loved about this book, and there's a lot of things that I hated about this book. But the biggest thing that I loved about this book, I think, was the fun attention to detail. The magic system is super interesting. They have to use like these magical typewriters to write out their spells, and everything's automated. It's very coding based. And another thing I loved about this book was we get a lot of interesting philosophical, even sometimes religious conversations and debates between our 2 leads, coming from very different perspectives, both hating the system but for different reasons and defending different parts of the system at some points. And that thematic and philosophical richness, I think, is done so well in this story. Now, the thing that I hate, the main one, is the romance. It is so mishandled. So mishandled. Like, it took me so long to even figure out that we were supposed to be shipping the characters. Like, there are so many reasons that these guys shouldn't be together, and the book does very little to assuage any of those reasons. And by the time that I was getting kind of on board that this might be an okay romance, like, it was weirdly rushed and just, like, not developed well at all, and I think the book would be way stronger if it was A, taken out, or B, just made better. Because there's so many little small things that could have been tweaked to make this such a strong romance, and it's so weak instead. So, disappointing, and was annoying me the whole way through the book. Would I recommend it? Generally, yes. I gave it 4 stars. I think definitely no going into it. This book puts the dark in dark academia. It is not a light, fun read. Then Echoes of the Imperium, a high fantasy steampunk pirates novel, gave 3 stars. I read a few books for the next installment in my quest to find a new favorite author, which included Emily Wilde Book 3, gave it 5 stars. The Ladies of Grace Ado Other Stories, gave it 4 stars, and The Tomb of Dragons, 4 stars. I also read another book in the Tomb of Dragons series, The Orb of 𝐒𝐈𝐿, 4 stars to that one as well. Then I read Miss Percy's Definitive Guide to the Restoration of Dragons, capping off a very delightful trilogy that is a Regency-era historical fantasy novel, with many introverted main characters going on adventures with little dragon hatchlings. Cute, fun, witty. 4 stars. I then read 2 sci-romance books in the same series, Aurora Blazing, 4 stars, and Chaos Reigning, 3 stars. I think the biggest difference for me in the 4-star versus the 3-star is, though the sci-fi elements in these books I think were equally good, I loved the romance in Aurora Blazing more than I loved the romance in Chaos Reigning. But that is just a taste, and yours could be very different, but definitely recommend this sci-romance series in general. Then I made a video of reading BookTube's best books of the year. Included in that video was The Ornithologist's Field Guide to Love, 2 stars. An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, 4 stars. I also, after the video, read the sequel to that one, A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor, also gave that 4 stars. And Legacy of the Bright Wash, which I will leave unrated for now. And you'll have to go watch the video to find out why. I then read Fable for the End of the World, one of my most anticipated books of the year. It's a young adult dystopian enemies to lovers romance. And I gave it 2 stars. I thought it failed on pretty much every single one of those counts. Though there are people out there who love it, and I am glad for them. I'm not one of those people. I then had a reread, Fire, which is a romantasy book with really interesting world building and a strong female lead in a refreshingly emotionally intelligent way instead of just a I'm an assassin and good at killing people kind of strong female lead way. Anyway, in the past I would have given it 5 stars, but I think on this reread I downgraded it to 4 just because my taste is changing. I then read The River Has Roots, and I want to tell you more about this one. The setting of this novella is vaguely like historical England and vaguely fantasy world. The magic system is also very vague. It's said that it's grammar and like based on the conjugation of words and stuff, but you never really see that played out in how the magic actually works. It's all very wishy-washy, not really a system at all, which I think is my first both praise and complaint about this book. Because on one hand, when this book is giving poetic paragraphs about the power of language and grammar and like how that plays into the magic and trying to explain it all to me, I was so on board. I was like, this is fascinating, this is interesting, I love the way it's using its words. But then it never actually like used the setup. The setup was really good. And then there was not payoff for it. And the magic that was actually used was like way out here instead. So at the center of the story are 2 sisters. They're very similar to each other in personality, and they both love to sing. They sing magic into like these trees, which has to do with the magic somehow. It was not explained. But that's kind of a lot of the magic of this part of the magic, in that it's not very well explained. It's just kind of like they live on the border between the human world and fairy, and somehow their magic helps keep that balance. So one of the sisters attracts the attention of this fairy being. And this fairy being, they're very mysterious, they're very weird, but they start courting the sister. And she loves this fairy. But there's a little bit of conflict there because the way that the fairy wants to court and the way that the human wants to court isn't always the same way, and they've got some miscommunication going on there. So eventually you reach the main conflict of this book, which is the other sister has a human suitor. And he is annoying and kind of bad news, and then chaos ensues. I think this book was so strong in its atmosphere when it wasn't like trying to establish a magic system, but just going with the flow of like, this is wishy-washy soft magic, because like that was so cool. It felt very fairy tale. It felt very much like a folk ballad. And so if you're looking for novellas with strong atmosphere, I'd highly recommend it. If you're looking for like novellas that have satisfying follow through to what they set up, no, because it's not just the magic system, it's also like the relationship between the sisters. There's a lot of emphasis of how awesome friendship they are, and then that doesn't really feel like that comes through in the end either. A lot of parts of this novella that I was invested in didn't feel like it really got enough payoff, but if you're not really a looking for payoffs reader, I think it could really work for you. Anyway, even though I have all these nitpicks, I'm still giving The River Has Roots 4 stars. Then I read the duology We Hunt the Flame and We Free the Stars. These books are teen romantasy inspired by Middle Eastern culture and mythology. And I gave the first book 3 stars, second book 2 stars. Alas, I think these books were too annoyingly teen for me, you know? I then made a video rereading a lot of my favorite books to determine if they deserve to be on my favorites of all time list. So those included A Study in Drowning, 5 stars, Ethan Mathos, 5 stars, Death Masks, 5 stars, Ocean's Echo, 5 stars, and The Host, 5 stars. Definitely, that was a very fun video to make, and I had a blast rereading all of those books, which makes it quite a contrast to the next book that I read, Water Moon. Let me tell you a lot about that. Because I utterly despised Water Moon. Yeah, it's painful. How could a book with a cover this pretty turn out so bad? Well, it did. I don't really have anything positive to say about this book. It's just going to be a long list of things that I hated. If you're looking for a positive review, I'm sure you can find it on booktube somewhere else. Because everyone, of course, has their individual taste, and a book that is so not for me might be perfect for you. But here's all the reasons that I hated this book. So first, let me tell you about the plot and why I hated it. We are following a woman named Hana. She lives in a magical world that is just barely connected to Tokyo. Her and her father run this pawn shop where people from normal Tokyo accidentally stumble into it, and then at the pawn shop they are pressured into giving away one of their life's choices, something that they regret, and then it gives them some sort of like peace mind wipe about this regret choice that they had. They go off along on their day, and Hana and her father collect the magic of this regret from their life. And the book kicks off when one morning Hana's father is mysteriously gone from the shop, and one of these regrets has been stolen from the shop. And there are these evil monster overlords that really need this regret back and her father back. And so Hana goes on a quest to go find them. Accompanying her on this quest is this random guy who stumbled into the pawn shop that morning. His name is 𝐋𝐈𝐍𝐿, and he is a scientist. He's very smart, and he's, of course, very shocked at this magical quest that they go on. So how do I organize all my complaints about this book? First, let's talk about the quest structure. It very much feels like the worst version of a travelogue kind of book where they go from one magical location to another magical location, and you get like a few sentences of, oh cool, it's a new magical location, and then they do something really boring there that doesn't really make a lot of sense, doesn't move the stakes forward, doesn't help anything, doesn't develop anything, and then they're off on a new place. And the entire book is just repeating that structure over and over. And though maybe the first few times it happened, I was like, oh, this is kind of neat, I guess. By the time we got to location, like number 20, I was just so bored of them. Because none of the locations or stops really ended up mattering, especially to what is the crux of this novel, is the romance between Hana and 𝐋𝐈𝐍𝐿. There's a lot of them saying how much they're interested in the other one, but like no development for it, no actual chemistry between them, and a lot of that is because of the atrocious dialogue in this book. The author made a decision, and I know it's a decision because it's only in the dialogue, not the rest of the prose of the book, to have the dialogue be very stilted. And I can see the vision for it because it feels like dialogue that has been poorly translated from Japanese. Where the dialogue has like no emotion to it, no contractions, it's super formal, and it's so boring and lifeless. All of it. And does the dialogue successfully invoke the feeling and cadence of hearing Japanese? I guess in a weird way it does, but in a way that it is an insult to good translators. Because it feels like the absolute worst example of translating something where all of the soul of the original has been lost along the way into mechanical, stilted talking. Just to be clear, this book hasn't been translated. It doesn't even get that excuse. It's just the author deciding to make a ridiculous choice. And I could go on ranting for a long time about like every single scene and every single character and every single choice that this book made and why I hated them all. But I think I'm done ranting. I will just leave you with, I gave Water Moon 1 star. I don't give those out very often. This one is one of them. I then read Fireborn, a teen romantasy novel with world building inspired by like ancient Rome. 2 stars to that one. I then read Heartless Hunter, and boy, let me give you a review for this one. So this is a book that in the last year has gotten a lot of hype, a lot of buzz, especially on TikTok. It's one of the big romantasy books. So I was suckered in. I heard a review that I thought, that doesn't actually sound too bad. Let's try it out. And it's not like I thought this one was like particularly brilliant either, but it was okay. So our main character is a girl named Rune. She is a witch. She's not very powerful, and she's somewhat hampered that she has to keep her being a witch a secret because there are witch hunters in charge of the government right now, and they will take and kill any witch that they find. So she's made it her mission to try to save as many witches as possible. She helps them get away from the witch hunters, she helps smuggle them out of the city, etc. And in order to maintain her cover in society, she's known as the dumb rich girl who really hates witches because she publicly turned in her grandmother that was a witch earlier in the witch trials, which is an act that she has a lot of guilt about. Our other lead is named Gideon, and he is a witch hunter, dun dun dun! And his nemesis is her, is this witch that keeps breaking people out of prison, that keeps thwarting all of his plans. So he is trying to hunt her down. But then he gets a tip that she might be the witch that he's been looking for. So he starts investigating her, and what better way to investigate someone than by courting them? She decides this is a great opportunity and starts trying to court him back because she figures that if they get married, she can trick him into giving her a lot of information about the witch hunters, which can help her save more witches. And so that is the romance at the center of this book. I felt like the first third of this book, I was so hooked. I was so there for it. It really set up our characters well. It set up our romance well. I was invested all the way through. Then as the book kept going, I got less enamored with it. There's a few elements that made that happen. I think the first is that though the setup of witch versus witch hunter, so strong of a setup, the manipulation, lying, and ulterior motives in this romance kept going throughout the entire book. Like, even once they've reached the stage of getting together as a romantic couple, there is still so much lies and manipulation between them, and that was a deal breaker for me. It made me really not ship the romance anymore. I was like, wow, you guys are just not right for each other. Should break up. And another thing that made me like this book less as it went on is that the plot points were just kind of repetitive, and it got boring. In the end, I gave Heartless Hunter 3 stars, and I am not invested enough to continue on with the sequel, but I don't regret reading it, because I did enjoy quite a little bit of this book. Now, a note that isn't necessarily a criticism of the book itself, but a criticism of the marketing of this book, because this book is marketed as teen, young adult, and it has explicit sexual content, and I take issue with that. I don't think a book that has explicit adult content should be marketed as a teen book. It's an adult book at that point. And those are the last 40 books that I read. Thank you for watching and listening.